Hello, welcome back. My name is Charlie, to those of you who are new here, and I have 5 books in front of me that I want to talk about today. This is a series review. It's my first series review on the channel, so I don't really know what to expect. I assume it'll probably be pretty short because I can't really give you many spoilers, or I don't want to spoil anything about this series, really. My main goal is to just let people know that the series exists, because I don't think enough people have heard of it. I don't think enough people have read it. I think it's a lot of fun. I don't necessarily think that this will be your new favorite series, but I do think that this is a series that deserves to be read. If maybe you're a very specific person, or if you have somewhat specific tastes, and those specific tastes that I'm talking about will be made very clear very soon. This series goes by the name of X Heroes, which is also the name of the first book here. This was a series written by Peter Clines, published by Broadway Books. The first book came out, or I believe was published in 2010. And then the next book, which is called Expatriates, came out a year later in 2011. A couple years later, we got 2 more books, actually. So we had Excommunication and Expurgatory. And then we were followed up, I think 3 years after that, with Exile, which ended up being the last book in the series. And I say that like that because the 5th book, when the 5th book ends, it just kind of feels like how all the other books end. It didn't necessarily feel like it was the series conclusion, because each book almost feels self-contained, which is a positive, and I'll expand on that more in a second. But first I want to tell you just the general synopsis, or the general idea of this series, and quickly let you get a feel for if it is for you or not. This series takes place here on Earth, in Los Angeles, so California, America. However, in this world, in the series, people have started to develop superpowers simultaneously, almost. People separately have started turning into zombies, or as they refer to them in this series, ex-humans. So we have zombies and we have superheroes, and that's kind of already a cool crossover. Haven't seen that before. But then we find out very quickly, very early on, it's not a spoiler, it's the name of the book, that heroes can also become these X's, right? So we have ex-heroes. So zombies, superheroes, superhero zombies, or I guess not superhero zombies, but super-powered zombies. Individuals who had superpowers that have died, that came back as a zombie, and that zombie still has their superpowers. In the first book, X Heroes, we meet most of the cast that we're going to follow kind of throughout the series. The cast changes over, the course of these books, but we set the scene with a handful of superheroes that they feel familiar, but also they have their own kind of fresh take on these abilities that they have, right? So, for example, this guy right here, this is Saint George, or the Mighty Dragon, and he's kind of like a Superman kind of character, right? He's tough, he can fly, he can breathe fire, which is why they call him the Mighty Dragon. But he's kind of your standard superhero kind of figure. We've also got Cerebrus, who's this lady right here, Danielle something. She is kind of, like the Iron Man of this series. She's kind of just like a smart, techie person that operates a piece of heavy machinery. It's Iron Man, but maybe in the Hulkbuster. Then we've got this character here, Stealth, who is kind of the Batman of the series, if you will. They are, sneaky, very intelligent. They've got their gadgets, and they kind of take the role of the leader, sort of, sometimes. They even do the whole, sneaking off into the shadows kind of thing. So, again, fits a familiar role. Then we've got Zap, who is this kind of ball of energy kind of guy. He is a person, and when he powers up, he turns into just pure energy, and he can fly around and do things with that energy. He's probably the one that doesn't necessarily, instantly draw my brain to another superhero that I'm more familiar with. Maybe kind of the Flash, almost, because he's pretty quick, and his name is Barry. So he exists. And then we have Gorgon, who didn't make it to the cover, but they kind of give me, I don't know, Cyclops meets Rogue energy, sort of. Like I said, the cast of characters will grow and change throughout the series, but those are our core group. I think there's a good balance of familiarity with kind of unique ness in each of the characters, and we do get a lot of their backstory and their origins, so to speak, right? Because the stories are structured in such a way that every few chapters we're going between now and then is how they structure it in this. The top of the chapter will say now or then, and that means it's either, present day or past. So we're looking at a lot of flashbacks. I think the flashbacks are for the most part, like just as good as the present day story. I think that they were really well done. Because we go back and forth pretty often, you might think that could be like a little jarring or that it could be distracting or something like that. But I don't think it was at all. The whole time, I thought it was really well done. It was a nice little doses of backstory. Didn't ever feel like they were overstaying their welcome. And yeah, I like them. I think the flashbacks were good, which is good because, like I said, you go back and forth a lot. In this first book, we learn a lot about these heroes and how they all came together. They're just trying to survive in this world that has been overrun with zombies. They all get together and they take refuge inside of Paramount Studios, which now they refer to as the Mount. And pretty much we're just following them as they try to survive. Now, similar to pretty much all other zombie stories, we are not only dealing with human versus zombie conflict, we're dealing also with human to human conflict. And then we have our added twist in this series of those superhuman individuals, and we have to deal with, superheroes against humans, against zombies, and against zombie superheroes. So the series takes on a lot of kind of familiar tropes and familiar settings and familiar characters, but it does have enough of a unique twist on it to keep you engaged and to keep the story interesting, I think. We watch our heroes as they set up and defend their home, their safe haven. The series as a whole kind of follows a similar pattern to Stormlight Archives, only in that each book feels kind of like it's focused on like a character. Like we get a lot of a specific character's backstory in each of them, which is really cool. I like that sort of thing, especially when for the most part, I like all these characters. All of them are a little annoying, or they are annoying, but everybody thinks they're annoying. So it's like, okay, that character is annoying, if that makes sense. Maybe there's some exceptions to that. But anyway, the characters are good. I like the characters. For the most part. I personally think book one was a really solid start to the series. I think it's probably got the lowest rating on Goodreads, but that makes sense in a series. The people who continue a series are the people who liked it most. So I think it's pretty typical that a book 2, a book 3, a book 4, a book 5, like the ratings get higher and higher because you're kind of curating the user base, or like the readers that are going to read that as you get deeper and deeper into a series. But I may even go as far as to say this was my favorite one. I'm not entirely sure. Book 2 does a lot of similar stuff, Expatriates, but we get to meet a lot of new characters, and we see, you can tell based on of the title, Expatriates, we get to see kind of what happens when the US military tries to get involved in things. And then we have book 3, which goes in a little bit of a different direction from the other two. This is kind of more, I'm not going to call it horror, like outright horror, but a horror light, maybe. It's got, some supernatural horror elements to it, which is pretty cool. And then book 4, Expurgatory, takes us again in a new direction. This one maybe more of a mystery with potentially still some horror elements. It's a zombie apocalypse series, so I guess they all have some horror elements, but it's more of a mystery than the other 3 have been. And then we have book 5, Exile, in which I feel like we got back to the similar vibe that we had in books 1 and 2. We get back into the roots of the story, kind of, but we explore a little bit more of the world that has been set up in these past 4 books. So now I have to answer the question of who is this series for? Who should read this series? Well, definitely if you heard zombies, superheroes, and superhero zombies, and you got excited, you should pick up the series. No questions asked. But if you didn't get excited by those words, I wouldn't necessarily count it out. More than once, I have described this as the closest I've gotten to reading a comic book while reading a novel. It very much feels like a comic book. So if you like comic books and you like this style of comic books, I do think that you might like this. I also think this series makes for a great slump buster or a great palate cleanser read. It's the kind of series where you can pick up a book, turn off your brain, and you just blaze through it. They are page turners. They're really easy books to read. They don't make you think very hard. They are very easy to visualize. The pace is great. You just keep going. I think I've read each of these books in like 4 days each, something like that. And for me, that's super fast. I mean, they're not very big books, but I don't read quickly. And I read all of these physically, like I didn't use audiobooks, and so that's really quick for me personally. So I could easily see somebody reading this in like a couple of sittings. You sit down a few times with the book and it's done, and you didn't have to think very hard, and you had a good time. And I think that it's great to have a series like that. I don't always need something complex or something that has beautiful prose or anything like that, and you're not going to get any of that here. It's just fun. It's just a fun series. It's a cool world with cool characters, and cool stuff happens. There's a little gore and stuff, and so if you're not into that, if you don't like zombies, you might not love it. But if you're in the mood to just remove your brain from your head and just like tear through some pages, these are great. I've heard people refer to them as like pulpy and schlocky and popcorn books, and I think those are all really good descriptors of these books. They're a little camp, they're a little silly, but they're just fun. And I also really like that each one of them, while they are connected and they are, it's the same characters for the most part throughout this series, and the storyline carries over from one book to the other, they still kind of feel self-contained. And I don't think, I read them all kind of back to back. Like I read X Heroes in January, I read the next one in March, and then I read 2 in April, and then I read the next one in May. So I read them all pretty quickly. I read the whole series in just 5 months. But you could easily read one and either just stop there or pick up the next one a year from then, and you'll be fine. Like, you don't need to do much of a refresher. They just feel kind of self-contained, and the connecting pieces are fun and great, but they're almost, I'm not going to say monster of the week, but it feels kind of like that. Like, in each book there is a contained issue and it gets resolved. And I just think that's great. I think that it's a great kind of book to have as a palate cleanser, because you don't know necessarily when you're going to find yourself in a reading slump. But when you do, you could pick one of these up, and you can do that 5 times with this series. I'm currently using Dresden Files and Hybrid Helix as my kind of palate cleanser reads, or slump buster kind of reads. But I kind of wish that I had treated this series like that instead of just kind of barreling through it, because I liked it a lot. I wish that I kind of sprinkled it throughout my reads. Again, I don't really think this is going to make people's top 10s or anything like that. Like, it didn't make mine. It's not in my top 10 series of all time. But it is one I think of fondly, and it is one that I think served a purpose and served it really well. And I think a lot more people would get a lot out of this. I don't ever meet anybody that has read these books before, and I think that's a crime. They're tropey, and they're not necessarily like entirely made up of fresh ideas, and there are definitely things that I wish the author did. Like, I wish the author had flexed his brain just a little bit more, like the creative side of his brain, and given us more superpowers. We do touch on a lot of similar themes throughout the series, but it didn't really matter, because that's not what this series was for me. It was just something that I could read for fun, and that was its purpose for me, and it nailed it. I think the author had planned on writing more of these books, but the publisher kind of said, like, no, like it's not necessarily at the point where it's profitable for us, or it wouldn't be profitable to print book 6 for this book. So he kind of got turned down, which is a bit of a bummer. But I feel like maybe it was about when the series was released, because Marvel and The Walking Dead were kind of taking off as this series was coming out. So I feel like it fell under the radar, which is a shame. But yeah, for anybody watching this that thought anything I said sounded fun, I think that you should do yourself a favor and pick up at least the first book and give it a shot. It's not going to ask a lot of you. You shouldn't ask a lot of it. Just have fun with it. That's pretty much all I can give you in terms of spoiler-free thoughts on this series. If you have read it, let me know. Even if you've just read, book one, let me know. I would love to meet somebody that I could talk to about this book or this series. And if you haven't, let me know if it sounds good to you at all, or if it sounds horrible based on anything that I said. Yeah, I'm curious to hear any and all thoughts around this series. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.